Welcome to the SFL's schedule release show on 11 Sports and for the fans. I'm Commissioner Cameron Irvine, and we have our full panel of analysts here tonight to break down everything. 12 weeks in the regular season starts July 17th, and each of our 22 teams plays all 12 of those weeks. Let's meet our panel first. The defensive back for the Carolina Skyhawks. He also does play-by-play for the SFL and 11 Sports for the fans, Twitch and YouTube. It's Michael Torillo. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well, Cam. Thank you for having me on and allowing me to talk to the masses about the Simulation Football League. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Absolutely. The owner of the Vancouver Legion, also their general manager, Andy Hamilton, is here. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing well. How are you, Cam?
I'm great. Over there in your bottom left-hand corner, the owner of the Arizona Scorpions, Eddie Gage, is here. How you doing, Eddie?
What up, though? It's a beautiful day out here in the desert, and looking to cap it off the right way with this show. Can't wait to see how it plans out.
General manager of the Fort Worth Toros, also plays tight end for him, Robert Garrett Jr. How you doing, Robert?
I'm doing great, Cam. Excited to be here with this fun crew and talk about the schedule.
And last but not least, the defensive lineman for the Chicago Wildcats, Gerald Giudice, here. How you doing, Gerald?
How you doing, Cam? Thanks for having me. Glad to be here, and let's get this show on the road.
Absolutely, and I don't want to waste another minute here. Getting underway, let's take a look at the Week 1 schedule. We're certainly excited to unveil this for everybody here tonight, and let's take a look. There it is, folks. Your opening weekend. It will start Friday, July 17th. The Atlanta Swarm will host the Baltimore Vultures at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on 11 Sports and for the fans. The entire slate of matchups on 11 Sports and for the fans. And as we look across the schedule to 4 games on Saturday, 4 games on Sunday, and 2 on Monday, that opening day, opening weekend slate continues with Fort Worth at Houston. It's the number 1 pick. We don't know who it is yet. The draft is on FTF on June 21st. Along with Xander Gold, they'll be at Houston. Vancouver at Jacksonville, an exciting rematch of the quarterfinal, the 4-5 matchup from this postseason. Louisiana goes to St. Louis. The head coach of St. Louis is the new coach of Louisiana with new ownership there. And then Sioux Falls goes to Portland to cap off the night. It's the Portland Fleet's inaugural game, and they will host the runners-up at home. Before we get to the rest of the slate, let's start with Michael Torillo on our panel. That Friday game, that opening Saturday slate, what do you think about that, Mike?
Well, I'm really excited, especially for the Vancouver and Jacksonville rematch. That was a fantastic game. The 4-5 matchup at the quarterfinal, as you said, for the most recent playoffs. Vancouver won it in an absolute thrill ride, 40-37. And I can't wait to see what these two teams, fresh out of an offseason, put on the field.
How about you, Andy? Your team's involved here in this early slate, but you can't go wrong with any of these matchups.
No, I would say my eye is actually drawn to Louisiana and St. Louis, Cam. I think this is a sleeper game between that first weekend where, Gerald Smith returns to St. Louis and, with his new shiny team, fresh uniforms, to really, go to battle with Dwayne Collin and Mr. O'Reilly and that new St. Louis rebuilding team. I'm interested to see how that one goes.
On Sunday, the slate starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. Gabriel Manning will take on the team he left as the Tulsa Desperados host the London Knights. Then at 3 o'clock Eastern, it's Shan Varner, owner of Chicago, playing his son, Cole Varner, who kicks for Mexico City in a rematch of that Season 9 championship game. At 5 p.m. Eastern, a combined 7 SFL championships have been won by the Florida Storm or the Queen City Corsairs. They'll take on each other. And then in the nightcap, it's the Lone Star Glory debut. They will host the Arizona Scorpions at 7 Eastern. Eddie will be a part of that game. Eddie, what do you think of that Sunday package?
Wow, some very interesting games, Cam, as you stated. But I'm looking forward to see how that Queen City versus Florida game pans out. You got Florida on a rebound here after winning 3 straight championships and suddenly finding their way, out of the playoffs last year entirely. But word on the street is that Mighty RX is going to be, manning down the fort on offense and defense next season for his team once again. Queen City losing their defensive coordinator and GM, but they still have their offensive coordinator intact with a new weapon in Deezer Powell after losing Stephen Hacker. So that's going to be a really intriguing matchup to keep your eye on.
Robert, what do you think about the Sunday slate?
Yeah, that London and Tulsa matchup is one that's caught my eye just because, a little bit of a rough like leaving by Gabriel Manning from London, and a little bit of the tension there. I think that's going to be an explosive matchup and a fun one to kick that day off with.
The weekend doesn't stop on Sunday. It continues Monday night with an explosive doubleheader of a pair of rivalry games. Carolina is at Charleston for the Battle of the Carolinas, and then it's Vice Wars in Week 1, Las Vegas at Denver, one of the league's best rivalries. Gerald, your thoughts on that Monday pair to end Week 1 and just the rest of the slate in general?
The Monday pairing I'm looking forward to is the early game, the Carolina-Charleston, the Battle of the Carolinas. Both teams playing well, so I think that'd be a great game. The game that I'm looking forward to the most for the whole week is the one that Andy was talking about, Vancouver versus Jacksonville. I think that's just going to be a barn burner of a game. Like I said, a playoff rematch. So I think that's going to be the fantastic game of week 1.
So Baltimore and Atlanta will open things up. The Vultures, one of 2 teams to beat the defending champs last season, and they'll get their chance to do it again in Week 1. Atlanta will have a new quarterback. We don't know who that is yet after Marcus Dunhill's retiring, so that game should be very, very interesting. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the 4 teams under new leadership and what their schedules look like when the SFL Season 15 schedule release show continues in a moment. Welcome back to the SFL schedule release show. Apologies for the technical difficulties there. For season 15, the 15th anniversary season of the SFL and 11 Sports and for the fans. Must-see matchups come your way next, and these are some of the best ones on the schedule. We start with Week 2, Atlanta and Sioux Falls, a rematch of the championship game, along with Atlanta and Sioux Falls, Denver and Portland, as Jacob Bouvette, who now owns the Portland Fleet, will face his former team. Queen City is at Fort Worth. That means that Stephen Hacker and Nacho Sicario will host their old team. Florida and Jacksonville, a battle for Florida in Week 2, always a classic. London goes to Louisiana for the Revolution home opener. Lone Star will go to Vancouver as Charles Doherty and some of those Legion defectors return. In Week 3, Atlanta and Denver will clash. Those are the last championship winners. Denver in Season 13, Atlanta in Season 14. Baltimore and Carolina in Week 3. The Vultures meet the Sky Rats again, as the Vultures like to refer to the Skyhawks. St. Louis and Chicago, a battle of just a tremendous quarterfinal matchup, a rematch of that from last postseason. Sioux Falls takes on Charleston in another playoff rematch in the quarterfinals. And then in Week 4, Fort Worth and Lone Star. It's the battle for DFW, the first chapter in that, and then Vegas and Sioux Falls tee off again. So with all of those matchups on the slate for the first month, Andy, which one sticks out to you that is a can't miss?
Sure, and I've had this circled since these two franchises, put their names on the map. It's got to be Fort Worth as well as Lone Star for me. That battle for Dallas-Fort Worth. I mean, we got to see those two if everything permits, potentially in the same area watching the game together, right, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reading the chat here too. Carolina getting a little upset that we called them Sky Rats on TV, but it's what Baltimore says. That's what fuels the rivalry. That's what makes rivalries so fun. Eddie, what are you looking forward to most?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's a number of matchups on this slate you can look at. Myself, I like to see Louisiana go up against Fort Worth. You got a battle of two sort of new franchises going at it. Louisiana just taking a helm, with Gerald running the ship. Then you got Fort Worth with Stephen Hacker taking over. You got two seasoned coaches going at it, which is the match I'm sort of looking at, not so much the rivalry, so to speak, but just you got two great coaches going back and forth. Gerald with Louisiana and Stephen Hacker and company with Fort Worth. So that's going to be a very back and forth matchup, and it's going to probably come down to late in the fourth quarter once again.
How about you, Robert?
I think I'm looking forward to that Week 3 Atlanta at Denver matchup. You got Jeremy back at the helm, holding the clipboard, calling the plays, and Atlanta, looking to continue through their momentum from last season and carry themselves to try and get another shot at the title. So I think that's going to be a big matchup, and we're going to see a lot of scoring in that game.
Gerald, your big one in the first month?
Well, everyone took my games, but so I'm going to go with, I'm going to be a homer. I'm going to go St. Louis at Chicago. We had a hard time at home this past season, and I think it's going to be a rivalry game for months and years and seasons to come. I think that's going to be the game for us.
All right, Michael Torillo, you get the last word representing the Skyhawks here.
Well, I don't take kindly to being called Sky Rats on national TV, especially while I'm on air with you. So I'm obviously looking forward to that game. But as a neutral, I think my favorite matchups are the ones where new owners are playing against old teams. So Portland and Denver, Fort Worth and Queen City, Lone Star and Vancouver, Louisville and St. Louis and London. Those matchups are always the most intriguing to me. And I've got a secondary point here that for the first time since season 10, there are 3 SFL teams in the state of Texas.
Yeah, the Texas definitely getting more representation this offseason with Lone Star moving from Seattle and Fort Worth getting granted an expansion team. So given the fact that the Atlanta Swarm won the Season 14 championship game, they'll start us off tonight with our team previews. And for Atlanta, their schedule looks like this. They start with Baltimore, Sioux Falls, Denver, and Charleston. Not an easy slate. And then faces friendly foe Chicago twice, weeks 5 and 11. They finish up at Queen City. Let's start with Torillo on the defending champions schedule breakdown.
Well, it's a tough start right out of the gate with 3 avian matchups in a row, Baltimore, Sioux Falls, and Denver. And I want to highlight the Sioux Falls matchup because, of course, that is the championship rematch that did play in the title game. And Sioux Falls, it's at Sioux Falls, so they'll be looking for some revenge on their home field. Also, I want to highlight the sneakily difficult matchup against Charleston in Week 4. That Charleston team was greatly improved last season, went 8-4, made the playoffs for the first time. Charleston could be a dark horse team to watch this season to make a run.
All right, Andy, what do you think about this Atlanta Swarm schedule?
Yeah, so the first thing I always look at when I break down a schedule is the home versus away splits. To me, this away schedule for Atlanta is sneakily interesting because Sioux Falls, Denver could both be potential push games, especially on the road. Chicago, very tough franchise. And then you have Arizona and Tulsa, who last season did not perform incredibly well, but picked up a lot of good free agents, learned a lot last season, and this season could surprise some people. And then you finish it off with Queen City. I think this is an interesting slate for Atlanta, and it's all going to depend on that quarterback position.
If you're new to the SFL and you're not quite sure what's going on, the Simulation Football League is usually playing simulations of football all summer and winter long. That gets started July 17th. We're breaking down the schedule tonight. And there's been a lot happening since the championship game was played on April 26th. We'll break down some off-season storylines and headlines when the SFL schedule release show for season 15 continues in a moment. We'll be right back.
Two, one, you're back.
Welcome back to the SFL schedule release show for season 15 alongside Michael Turillo, Andy Hamilton, Eddie Gage, Robert Garrett Jr., and Gerald Giudice. I am Cameron Irvine. Let's not waste any time. Let's get to some more teams and some new teams at that. The expansion Fort Worth Toros is up next. And for Fort Worth, their schedule starts at Houston in week 1. Rich Pratchett and I will be calling that game. Big game there from Houston as a new Lone Star rivalry gets underway. They play 4 of 5 on the road, including 2 playoff teams in weeks 6 through 10. That includes Charleston, St. Louis, Sioux Falls, among others. So we start with Eddie Gage on your breakdown of Fort Worth.
Fort Worth, the first thing that comes to my mind when this schedule was released, Cam, yesterday, was the fact that Fort Worth and Houston, the owners of these respective teams, called each other out. Once it was announced that Fort Worth was awarded a franchise in Texas, DeMond, owner of the Houston Hyenas, was on record saying, I want to face those guys. There's only be one team in Texas. That should be us, the Houston Hyenas. And Stephen Hacker and company accepted the challenge and said, hey, we'll gladly drive down to your place. You can come to our place. It does not matter. We're going to walk away with a W, and he's confident of that. So that's going to be a very interesting matchup to see how that plays out, Cam.
All right, Robert, this is your schedule. This is your team. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how it all shaped out, that 4 of 5 stretch on the road, but 2 games at home late in the season could be helpful.
Yeah, I think those last 2 home games for us are going to be big, but honestly, we got to hit the field hard in the first 6 weeks. We got a bunch of tough matchups. Queen City is going to be rough. Arizona built back up in the offseason and are going to be ready to fight. Sioux Falls and at Florida. There's a whole lot of action in there, and we got to get ready to go and get there quick.
Let's stick with the state of Texas and find out Lone Star's full schedule. They start with Arizona at home, so the Scorpions have to go to Lone Star for their inaugural game. That's always a tough challenge. Lone Star's back of the schedule is brutal compared to the front. 5 of their last 7 games against Season 14 playoff teams, including St. Louis, Sioux Falls, Mexico City, Queen City, and the last week at Chicago. We start with Gerald on the Lone Star Glory. What do you think of their draw?
Like you said, their last 7 weeks are horrendous, and their road schedule is horrible. You have Vancouver, who is 8-4. You have Sioux Falls in week, I believe, number 6. That was 8-4. You have Queen City, that was 8-4. Chicago 7-5. I mean, you have a tough road schedule right there for the Lone Star Glory. Welcome to the SFL with that weeks with those schedules. So it's a pretty daunting task for a new team. I think they should handle it well.
Michael Turillo, a minority owner of the Carolina Skyhawks, goes to Lone Star in the offseason. I think a lot of Skyhawks were hoping they'd get the chance to take on Lone Star. Not this season, but what else do you see on the Glory's schedule?
We'll get them in the playoffs. Don't you worry. This schedule is really tricky. A lot of tough road games, as Gerald said. They played twice against Fort Worth in the battle for the Dallas Metroplex, excuse me. The last 3 of last 4 against playoff teams, Mexico City, Queen City, and Chicago. That's a brutal run-in, and we expect Tulsa to be good as well this year. So they've got to rack up wins in the first half, but you look at the first half, they've got Vancouver and Florida, who Vancouver was really good last year, and Florida I expect to have a turnaround year. There are no easy games on this schedule.
Let's go to the expansion, Portland Fleet, and check out their look. They get 2 home games early, but they are tough, man. Sioux Falls and Denver. They follow that up with a couple of birds, Vegas and Carolina. They play 4 of their final 6 games on the road, and they have to travel to Canada and Mexico back-to-back in weeks 7 and 8. The expansion Fleet, we lead off with Andy Hamilton. What do you think?
Yeah, this schedule looks really tough for Portland. They're going to be up against it, Cam. They got Las Vegas in week 3. Interesting to see Truzman return to Vegas. That gave him a decent start. And then those road games are going to get very interesting. Mexico City and Vancouver, as well as Louisiana and Fort Worth. You don't really know what you're getting just yet with those franchises. Florida and Charleston. What an interesting way to welcome Matt South back to the SFL with a very tough schedule.
And no Baltimore either, so he won't play his former team. He also won't play the Arizona Scorpions. And Eddie, are you happy or sad about that?
Cam, for us, it makes no difference. Every opponent is just that, another opponent. You just put them up in front of us, and we'll make the most out of it. We look at it with an even slate. So, I mean, sure enough, there are some rivalries along the way, but we take each challenge the same way with the same mentality. So it doesn't matter for us.
The Fort Worth game in Week 12 was interesting. We'll get a chance to look at how the 2 expansion teams fared throughout the season in that last matchup of the year. Before we take a quick commercial break, let's go to Louisiana and see what the Revolution have in store for us this season. The first 2 weeks are just dynamite. At St. Louis versus London, almost their entire team has either St. Louis players or London players. It feels like that's going to be incredible. The Revolution play all 3 international teams, and that chunk right there in the middle, weeks 4 through 7, Mexico City, Portland, Baltimore, Vancouver, very tough, although 2 of them are at home. Let's go to Robert Garrett Jr. Start us off with Louisiana.
Yeah, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Weeks 4 through 7, incredibly difficult, and you got those 2 home games against Baltimore and Vancouver, where Gerald's going to have the chance to really show what he can do with his team against top-tier talent in the league.
All right, what about you, Gerald? What do you think of this Louisiana schedule?
It's kind of tough to look at considering they're playing a couple of the new teams like Fort Worth and Portland. But with Streeter and the new linebacker that got Blake Craze, I think if they can get past that middle section of the schedule, I think they can actually do pretty good.
All right, that's a look at the 4 new teams, or the 4 teams that are under new management, 2 expansion and 2 relocation franchises, off-season storylines, and how those teams' schedules shape and fare when we come back. You're watching the SFL Schedule Release Show for Season 15 on 11 Sports and for the fans. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the SFL's Schedule Release Show for Season 15. We've got a full panel tonight, and over the last month, the SFL hasn't had any games, but it's had a ton of off-season movement and storylines. There's a lot to get to here, but mainly there's been a lot of new leadership making some big moves. Johnny Pickler still hasn't signed. Robert Redford was a big splash for Vancouver. St. Louis still does not have a single offensive player under contract. They're going to have to build all the way through the draft after making the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. So we start with Eddie. There's lots to get to here with these old faces in new places, but what has been, your biggest storyline of the offseason for you?
Actually, there's a few of them. One, Johnny Pickler taking his time, weighing out all of his options. He wants to make sure he makes the right choice. And in general, Chad, he's drawn both, positive and negative, comments about it. But he wants to make sure he makes the right decision. So I'm not going to fault him there. St. Louis, revamping their entire offense. The good thing about it is that they still have Drew Riley, who's going to be anchoring that defense as their coordinator. So they have the ability to remain in games. The question is he going to remain aggressive on defense now that Shane Masters has retired? Also, wrapping this up is the fact that in the SFL, you got a lot of things going on. One thing I looked at is Liam Hammer leaving Chicago after having a phenomenal season. He finished the season hotter than any wide receiver in the SFL throughout the final 5 games of the season for Chicago. But he decided to jump ship and move and sign with the Glory. So, and as of right now, he's going to be their number 1 receiver. In Chicago, he played as the number 2 receiver. Will he be able to get open and make the plays that he made for Chicago as their number 2? Now that he's going to be guarded by the best cornerback on each team.
Robert, Eddie stole the show. You have anything to add there? He wrapped it up beautifully.
I think he hit on pretty much everything. St. Louis is going to be fun to watch in the draft, though, and see where they go with rebuilding an entire offense.
Let's any final thoughts from Michael, Andy, Gerald? Any points you want to make about this offseason?
Yeah, something really important happened just yesterday, and I'm surprised nobody mentioned it. Ray Bentley is actually taking a leave of absence from the Mexico City Aztecs. You know, he's a Hall of Famer, he's a champion, he's an MVP. And he's decided to step down at least for now. So Mexico City has a huge, ginormous Hall of Fame-sized hole to fill in the backfield. So that raises a lot of different questions. Does Phoenix Jones, the fullback, jump to replace him? Do they take a running back in the draft? Are they waiting to try and sign somebody in free agency? All these questions now circulating around a Mexico City team that seemed to be all set going into the offseason.
And Xander Gold just signed with Fort Worth as well. That was a huge signing after not many teams felt like he would be able to find a team, coming up for the rest of the season. Andy, last word on this?
Yeah, and I also wanted to talk about Matt South a little bit, 2 quarterbacks, including Xander Gold, who, kind of came back from the dead, if you will, and have taken very important spots on new teams. And I'm looking forward to see them hit the field because they are under contract. They're ready to go for the season.
A ton of wide receivers moving, big-name wide receivers moving teams this offseason, too. It's been fun to see how that develops. So without an offensive player, so far anyway, what does St. Louis's season look like? They're going to be playing a lot of low-scoring games, I have a feeling, because that defense is going to be good. They host their former head coach in Week 1. They have the rematch with Chicago in Week 3, and the Fish and Chips rivalry is renewed with London in week number 10. Michael Turillo, I don't know if you've gotten to call a Fish and Chips game before, but we'll get to some of the better rivalries in the league a little later in the show, but that is a fun one for sure.
I have called a Fish and Chips game, Cam.
Awesome.
Thank you for asking. I called at the first convention the London against St. Louis game there. So, yeah, it's a great rivalry. A lot of friendly ribbing going back and forth between owners there. St. Louis, it's going to be tough because they've got to build their entire offense from scratch through rookie players in the draft, or maybe they're looking to pick up a late free agent. But they did make the playoffs last season after a long playoff drought. So this team is trending in the right direction. They do lose their head coach, but they keep their defensive coordinator. The rematch with Chicago is going to be big. And the last 3 games, London and then at Houston at Sioux Falls, could determine whether they make the playoffs at the end of the season.
Eddie, how do you see this shaping out for the Gladiators? Do they make a return trip, or where are their hurdles here?
It's going to be tough, Cam. As I mentioned a moment ago, their defense is anchored by a great defensive coordinator in Drew Riley. He's very aggressive. He has aggressive play style. Every week I'm watching him. He seems to do things that not other coordinators do. He's very aggressive, and sometimes it's to a fault, but I've seen it playing out for him many times. But he's had a pretty spectacular offense to rely on. Johnny Pickler didn't throw the ball as much as some other quarterbacks do, but they were very efficient in the run game. Are they going to have that same approach this season? It's probably going to depend on the weapons that they get on the outside. So we have to just remain and see how it goes, how it shapes out. Cody Scott is also gone. He was a big primary weapon for them in the red zone. So
good coach too.
It's going to be important for them.
Yeah, Mexico City's up next. They, as Turillo mentioned, lost Ray Bentley just less than 48 hours ago. What will the Aztecs look like? Well, here's their schedule. They start with a couple playoff teams. Then they have that cross-Atlantic trip to London before hosting Louisiana. That critical wild card matchup with Queen City in Week 11. I'm sure the Aztecs would like to get some revenge there. So we start with Andy Hamilton on Mexico City and what their slate looks like.
Yeah, the loss of Ray Bentley is going to hurt and would hurt any team to lose their running back this late in the process and have to, retool how you're going to run that offense. But I think this schedule release should give them some comfort in knowing that they're not facing one of the toughest schedules this season. When you look down this line, historically, at St. Louis, at London, at Houston, just looking off of what those teams, Tulsa, did last year, there are some winnable road games here for Mexico City. When you partner that with some home games that they might be able to get the edge in, I think this schedule actually favors Mexico City, despite some losses, to have a good season.
What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I agree with what Andy was saying. I think the biggest part of Mexico City's schedule is that last 5 games. Home against Baltimore, then at Lone Star, Tulsa, then the home games, Queen City and Vegas. Those are all going to be really big games. I think Lone Star is going to come in hot. Tulsa is going to do the same. I think they've rebuilt from last season where they had some struggles, and I think that last 5 games is huge for Mexico City to make it to the playoffs.
Queen City's going to be interesting. They move Jet Zero, who was an Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate, to running back. They lost Stephen Hacker, which was an MVP candidate, but they didn't lose too much, actually. Queen City's got a good lineup coming back. They do have 5 road trips west of the Mississippi River, so they play a lot of games out west. It'll be interesting to see if Queen City suffers from any sort of jet lag. And they do play the last 4 title winners as well. We start with Gerald on Queen City. Sometimes, regardless of whether they played well or not last season, Gerald, playing all those championship winners is brutal.
It is brutal. I mean, that's going to be definitely a test for Queen City. Losing Stephen Hacker was humongous for that, and see if they can find a way to replace the irreplaceable Stephen Hacker. But if you look at their schedule, their games against Jacksonville, Vancouver, Sioux Falls, Atlanta, all those games that would be tough are at home. So that gives them a pretty decent shot at it because they play great at home. Will those 5 road trips west of the Mississippi hurt them? Time will tell.
Eddie, how do you look at the 4-time champions schedule here?
They lost Stephen Hacker, but they gained Deezer Powell. And I don't want to upset anyone, but they lost a great weapon in Stephen. But Deezer Powell is a playmaker. It seems like every time I'm watching their games, he's making a big catch downfield 2-3 times a game. And often they go into the end zone. So, but they also lost their coordinator on defense and their GM. But losing that GM didn't seem to hurt them too much because they got Deezer Powell after he left. So, again, I mean, they got great leadership over there. They didn't lose too much, as you alluded to earlier, Cam, and I expect them to make another run to the playoffs this season.
Another underrated signing, that Deezer Powell to Queen City. That's going to be very interesting. When we come back on the Schedule Release Show, we'll talk best rivalries in the SFL and some schedules that are involved in some of those rivalries when the SFL Schedule Release Show for Season 15 continues in a moment.
You're back.
Welcome back to the SFL Schedule Release Show for Season 15. We're talking rivalry games here coming back from the break. These are just a few of them. Vice Wars between the Nightwings and the Fury. Fish and Chips between London and St. Louis. The Battle for Florida, the Kings and the Storm. And then the feud, Baltimore and Carolina. I want to start with Robert here. Is your favorite rivalry one of these 4? And if it's not this one, which one is it?
I mean, I think selfishly, and it's not officially a built rivalry yet, but it would be Fort Worth and Lone Star. But out of the big ones that are currently have been built up and all those things, you got to go with Vice Wars. Between those jerseys and just all the hype that those teams put into it, and the fact that you get to see it twice this season, it's going to be a whole lot of fun.
Gerald, Jeremy just freaked out in the chat, the owner of the Denver Nightwings, because he put 2 and 2 together and realized there is a second matchup coming up that we have not talked about that yet, which we will get to very shortly. Which rivalry is in your heart, Gerald? Maybe Chicago and Atlanta, another good one.
Chicago and Atlanta is very close to the heart. We played them really well this past season, losing a heartbreaker 6-3. But if I had to go and not be a homer, I would say, being a foodie myself, the Knights versus the Gladiators. I mean, how else? I mean, winning, if you lose a game, you have to eat barbecue. I mean, come on. But I think the Knights and the Gladiators are going to be a great rivalry, and I love watching them play.
Tarillo, you've called so many rivalry games over the course of your career in the SFL. Is there one that you just can't wait to call again?
Well, besides the ones that I now can't call as a member of the Carolina Skyhawks, we seem to be involved in so many rivalry games. We've got the battle for the Carolinas with Charleston. We've got the feud with Baltimore. We've got with the Eggplant Bowl with London. You know, we got rivals everywhere. But the one I really look forward to calling every season is the Sunshine State Showdown. Florida and
Good
Jacksonville. I'm a resident of the Sunshine State myself, so to see two teams in my home state go at it, it's so fun to see. I called it this past season. It was a fantastic game. And it wasn't always this way because the teams used to be in Tallahassee and Alaska and still had a fantastic rivalry, and they've taken that now to be local rivals.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many great choices, and we hit on a lot of them. That's just outstanding. For Las Vegas, they will play Denver twice, and now we get to find out when they play that second meeting, and it's Week 11. Week 1 and Week 11, the largest difference or the largest length between rematches on this SFL schedule. They do travel to Atlanta in Week 10 and Sioux Falls in Week 4, so they got to go to the two top teams from Season 14. That is one brutal draw, and we lead off with Andy with that point, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely that point. When you look at this schedule, the away games are really, the nail in the coffin, if you will, if it tends to be that. I mean, Sioux Falls 8-4 last year, Queen City 8-4 last year, Atlanta 10-2 last year. This is a very tough schedule for a Las Vegas team that had Slyn Shady running the show as the GM now. Interested to see how they perform, but man, oh man, that's an interesting away schedule to start with.
Yeah, Eddie, what's it like playing? I don't know if you've ever played three in a row on the road before. They do get 3 at home after that, but what does that do to a team's psyche when you got to go 3 straight on the road like that?
Well, that depends on who you're asking, Cam. Some owners around here, they think that's a death wish, but it's definitely tough. Winning games on the road is always tough. You're sleeping away from home. You're in unfriendly confines. You got the crowd going. All that momentum. As soon as they make a big play, it seems like the entire crowd gets behind them. So it's big. It can be tough. So, but you just got to try to ignore all that noise and just focus on the guys on the field that you're playing against. Just try to wipe the crowd out of it.
The Carolina Skyhawks, part of many rivalry games, as Tarillo alluded to, and this is their schedule. Their home opener is actually against Baltimore. They'll play 4 of 5 at home, weeks 3 through 7, and all of that is pretty compelling. Tarillo, I want to get your initial thoughts on your schedule. As you mentioned, you have Eggplant Bowl twice. You've got the battle with Baltimore. You've got the Charleston game in Week 1. Rivalries all over the place. Chicago, Shan comes back for the first time in a couple of years in Week 6 as well.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite game on the schedule is the Chicago game. Shan versus his old team. It's going to be great. For the rest of the schedule, there's so much to look forward to. As you said, 2 Eggplant Bowls. The home games in the middle of the season, Chicago, Arizona, and Denver. Those are 3 very winnable games. That could make the difference between Carolina getting into the playoffs or not. Also, the 2 matchups versus London come towards the end of the season, and those 2 teams could be fighting for.
Gerald, what do you think?
Well, I'm looking forward to that game in week 6 as well against Carolina. But I think with their schedule, they only have 5 teams that they play with winning schedules. You have Charleston, you have Baltimore, Jacksonville, and Vancouver. So you have 4. I think they have a pretty favorable schedule. Like I said, Michael said, the middle part of the section where they have those 3 out of 4 home games will be the determining factor whether they can make the playoffs or not.
Yeah, London twice, Houston, Arizona down the back half along with Denver. So if Carolina can maybe break even or pull an upset or two in the beginning part of the schedule, you never know. They could be a sleeper. Let's look at London, the other side of that Eggplant Bowl rivalry, and what our brethren from the UK have to deal with. They also start with 2 on the road. Their home opener will be against Mexico City. They play 3 at home, one of 2 teams to play 3 at home straight weeks 7 through 9. And I found this interesting, Eddie. They play Arizona, even back when Arizona was Oklahoma City, for only the second time in 6 seasons. So those 2 franchises not getting, not getting involved too often. We'll start with Torillo on this and the London Knights.
Well, London's got an interesting schedule. They've got Carolina twice, as we already mentioned, a 3-game homestand to start the second half. Those games could be key. I see a lot of similarities between London and Carolina's schedule, where the middle portion is the most important. Denver and Atlanta on the road back-to-back is really tough, but my favorite game on the schedule is the Louisiana game. They face former coach Gerald Smith and many, many former players, including Reggie Streeter, Saren Storm, Nathan Blake, and many more.
Robert, you played with London last season. Is this the season that London can make the playoffs?
It's kind of hard to tell right now. They lost a lot of offensive weapons between Gabe Manning and Jason Williams and myself and Saren Storm. So they got a lot of pieces to put together on offense, even though they got Robert Merrill out of free agency. But I think that 3-game homestand for them is huge, especially after an away game at Denver and Atlanta. Both gives them a chance to recuperate and get together after 2 really hard games.
We'll have a lightning round of teams and reactions and final thoughts when the SFL schedule release show returns in a moment. We'll be back.
Two, one.
Welcome back to the SFL schedule release show for season 15. Lightning round now as we go through a lot of team schedules that we haven't gotten to get to tonight. We start with the Denver Nightwings, and Michael Torillo has their breakdown. What's the one thing about Denver's schedule that interests you?
Obviously, they face former Jacob Bouvette in week 2. They were 5-7 last season after winning the championship in season 13. Owner Jeremy Vega returns to coaching after taking a season off, and they meet the Atlanta Swarm in the battle of the last 2 championships in week 3.
All All right, how about Jacksonville, Torilla? This is always an interesting team, always a championship contender.
Finalists, 10-11, both put them to the Storm. They play the Storm twice in weeks 2 and 10. They're the only team to play 2 opponents twice, Charleston and Florida, and the opening game is a rematch of the Season 4 playoffs against Vancouver, where Vancouver won 4-7.
Let's go to Baltimore. Andy Hamilton has their breakdown. What's the standout on the Vultures schedule?
Yeah, definitely that week 1 matchup in Atlanta. Then you got Sioux Falls later in the season. That one, though, at home. Vancouver and Charleston at home. I like this schedule for Baltimore. Could be their year, Cam. You never know.
All right, from Baltimore to your team, the Vancouver Legion. What do you think of this schedule? It's definitely interesting.
2 words for you, Cam. Can't wait. I am looking forward to this. This schedule looks great. And I appreciate, they're Mighty in the chat is looking out for me, saying that, we got some smoke or disrespected. I don't think so, good sir. We accept this schedule, and we look forward to, facing every team who wants to come get these hands.
How about Sioux Falls? You play them in week 9. They're always a tough out, but the Sparrows have a really tough stretch. 3 of last 5 on the road, Queen City, Vancouver, Baltimore, back-to-back weeks. What are you looking at with Sioux Falls?
Second toughest schedule on paper coming into the season. Atlanta at home, tough. Charleston on the road, tough. Lone Star, at Queen City, at Baltimore, at Arizona, Vancouver at home. Sioux Falls cannot take 1 week off this year, Cam. It's going to be a tough road for the Sparrows.
All right, Eddie, your Scorpions, what does that schedule look like? 3 straight games against teams from the state of Texas. That is one of the wackiest parts of this SFL schedule. But what else stands out to you, Eddie?
We're the only team in the entire SFL who plays 6 games versus teams with 8 wins or more last season. But we're going to step up to the challenge and make do of it, and we're going to come out, and we look forward to making the playoffs this season, Cam.
All right, the Charleston Predators. A lot of conversation behind the scenes with our panel about this schedule. Eddie, how do you see it breaking down a very difficult start?
A battle versus Carolina, the battle of the Carolinas. Then you got Baltimore, who was in the playoffs last season. Sioux Falls, 3 back-to-back games. Sioux Falls with a heavy run game that's going to put their defense to the test. You got Jacksonville, who has what it seems like about 8 guys in the secondary to go up against. Denver with Jeremy Vega returning to coach the team. They got a very interesting, challenging schedule.
Let's go to Robert to break down the Tulsa Desperados. They get that new weapon in Gabriel Manning. I can't wait to see Deacon Nickens sling the rock with him. They end the season with 2 on the road. That's always tough, but your overall impressions of the Desperados trek?
Yeah, Tulsa has an incredibly tough back half of the schedule, playing a lot of big teams, and Deacon Nickens is going to have to get off to a hot start in the season and kind of ride that through the rest of the way if the Desperados want to have any success on this season.
The Florida Storm, 3-time champs, trying to make it back to the playoffs, Robert, and will they? They play all 4 teams under new ownership. They play 6 in a row against non-season 14 playoff teams. It's just a tough start.
Yeah, that start for Florida is going to be huge, and it's a big welcome back to Mighty and the coaching aspect of the Storm, and seeing if he can get things back under control for those first 3 games against Queen City and then at Jacksonville and at Vancouver.
All right, Gerald, you've got the Houston Hyenas breakdown. Houston trying to also make it back to the playoffs, a team that is usually there. A pretty balanced schedule all the way around for Houston. The rematch with Vancouver is going to be exciting from week 12. And the early part of the schedule is certainly winnable all the way around.
Yes, it is. There's part of the early part of the schedule is easy one. Like I said, that last week matchup against Vancouver, where 100 points were scored, is amazing. I think Houston only having to face 2 teams with winning records, being Baltimore and Vancouver. However, both of those are on the road, so it might be a tough road to go for Houston. But if the early part of the schedule goes well for them, they should do all right.
Houston doesn't have to go to the new teams in town in Texas. Lone Star and Fort Worth will come to them. Last but not least, the Chicago Wildcats, your team, Gerald. Here is your schedule breakdown. They face Jacksonville for the first time since August of 2019. Chicago has never beaten Jacksonville, surprisingly enough. I'm really looking forward to that one. But, Gerald, how do you think it fares for the Wildcats?
The Wildcats, to me, have a tough last 8 games of the season. If you look at the first part, there's very winnable games, but then you have Atlanta twice. You have Jacksonville on the road. You have Charleston. Our win percentage for the teams we're playing against is almost at 560. So we need to get a good start with the first 4 and hopefully manage to get through those last 8 to make the playoffs.
All right, so final thoughts from our panel tonight here as we wrap up the schedule release show for season 15. We're going to play a little who got rewarded and who got it rough, essentially, as we go around the panel. Let's start with Torillo. Who got it good? Who got it rough?
Well, who got it good? We mentioned it already. Mexico City, despite the offseason hardships that they now face after losing Ray Bentley, they only played 5 games against playoff teams from last season, and they got 3 of those at home, and the 3 are the toughest ones of the bunch: Queen City, Baltimore, and Chicago. So, and then who got it rough? Charleston has a tough strength of schedule, and they play 6 games against playoff teams from a season ago.
All right, Andy, that was Torillo's who got it good, who got it tough. What about you?
Yeah, I think Las Vegas got it really tough, Cam. The Fury, have the 5th most difficult schedule going in. They got to go to Atlanta this season, as well as play Sioux Falls on the road. After losing Robert Redford, going to be very interesting to see how the Fury respond. Who got it easy? I think the London Knights have a very favorable schedule for them to, build this team back up. They've made some moves. Liam Crowder has been working in the offseason. Cam, I think they are a playoff contender with this schedule.
All right, Eddie, who got it good?
Who got it good is my former team, Houston, with only 2 opponents with 8 wins or more last season. I look forward to them making a strong playoff push this season. Who got it rough? Yours truly, as I just mentioned a moment ago, versus 16 with 8 games or more. But we're gonna step up to the challenge, and we're gonna welcome all comers, Cam.
I don't think that's allowed for you to say that you got it tough. Roberts, who got it tough?
Yeah, who got it tough? I would definitely have to go with the Tulsa Desperados. I mean, that back portion of the schedule is just brutal for them, and they really just got to get things rolling quick. And then I think who got it easy, I'd have to go with Trujillo on this one and say the Mexico City Aztecs. They got some difficult games, but they're spaced out well and give them a chance to build for those.
All right, Gerald, do you agree? Is Mexico City the team that got it good, or are you going somewhere else?
No, I'm going to agree with Eddie Gage and London and Houston. I mean, they have 2 teams with 8 wins on their schedule. A couple of the new teams, I think Houston got off easy, but who got it the rough? I have to agree with Mike with Charleston. You have Baltimore, Sioux Falls, and Atlanta back to back to back, and 2 of those games on the road. That's tough. So overall, I think they have the hardest schedule. 567 win percentage against them. So that's my who got it tough.
If you missed it from earlier in the show, this is your Week 1 slate. Friday, July 17th, kicks off the Simulation Football League's 15th anniversary season, and we are going to have so much fun from new headquarters, calling those games, airing those games. It's going to be so much fun. 22 teams in SFL record, 22 teams in action coming up in mid-July, just about 6 weeks from now. So thank you to our panel, Gerald Giudice, Eddie Gage, Michael Torillo, Andy Hamilton, and Robert Garrett Jr. I'm Cameron Irvine. Thanks for being here. Good night, and have a great rest of your week.